When the art assignment challenged us to walk out of our houses and find the quietest place we could, I had a few ideas in mind, so I grabbed my camera and headed outside. My favorite thing about living just outside of Providence, Rhode Island is how beautiful and walkable our neighborhood is. I run here 3 times a week, and sometimes my husband and I go for nice long walks together. The timing of this assignment was pretty perfect because it just started getting warm outside and the weather today was awesome for a walk. The grass is just starting to turn green again, and every once in a while I'd spot a beautiful bunch of flowers poking up out of the ground. Little things like this make me so happy, especially after a long cold winter. Eventually, we reached one of my favorite spots in our neighborhood, a gorgeous cove and park with a nearby marina. I love it here, and even after living here for more than a year, I still get the urge to stop and take pictures of the water. But as I stood here looking out into the bay and listening, I noticed that this spot wasn't nearly as quiet as I remembered. Cars drove by on the road right next to us, other pedestrians passed us, and even the wind whipped through the cove, rustling in the trees and tickling our ears. So my husband headed into the village, and I continued exploring in search of the quietest place I could find. I decided that the best way to get away from the noise was to leave the main road and keep going until the quieter residential road ended. Down the street from the cove, there's this lovely peninsula full of the most beautiful old houses that rarely gets any traffic aside from the people who live there coming and going. At the end, there's a cul-de-sac, and past that, there's a bench looking out onto another smaller set of docks. I love sitting here. It's a less common spot to go compared to the park in the cove, so I didn't encounter any other people while I was there. To take it even further, I hopped down onto this tiny ledge that sits right over the water, where a swan was already enjoying the quiet. After making a new friend, I decided that this would be the closest I could get to finding the quietest spot in my neighborhood. I've always been appreciative of quiet places. I tend to enjoy many things that involve quiet, like reading, napping, and even just thinking. I'm at my most productive in silence, and often at my most creative. When there are very few distractions and I am less self-conscious about encountering other people, I do some of my very best work. There's also something about being in a quiet place that makes me feel very content. So for those reasons, I really enjoyed this assignment. I feel very lucky to live in a place where I have access to a spot this quiet and beautiful, and I look forward to enjoying it more often now that the spring is finally here. Also, I'm pretty glad that that swan decided not to attack me. After finding my quiet place, I met up with Matt at a nearby cafe for some happy tea, which has the most fitting name of any tea I've ever encountered. He mentioned to me that a nearby table was loudly complaining about how a group of loud kids had disturbed their relaxing manicures earlier that day, but they seemed completely oblivious to the level of noise that they were making in this otherwise quiet cafe. That made me think about how each person's individual concept of quiet is often determined by factors outside of their control. Today, when the places I walked felt noisy to me, it was because of passing cars or construction or low-flying planes overhead. But sometimes I created that noise when I chatted with my husband about the Instagram photo he took at the park, or even the sound of my camera beeping on and off. And I was much less conscious of that. That made me think about earplugs. If I put them in when I'm in a very quiet location as opposed to the loud ones they're intended for, I become immediately aware of more noises I almost never notice, like the internal noises of a living body. When I block out all sounds except the ones I make myself, I can hear my blood rushing, my heart beating, my breaths filling my lungs. I don't dare to speak, but if I did, my voice would feel almost too loud, perhaps even foreign, because I cannot hear the familiar sound of it returning to my ears. We are noise machines, unaware of most of the sounds our inner workings create. That is, until we block out everything else. Until we take the time to listen.